Shabbat Shalom. I hope you're well. This week's Torah portion is Numbers chapter 8, verse 1 through chapter 12, verse 16, and it is Lecha Alotecha. I think we're going to have a lighter discussion today than usual. What really was happening with this Torah portion today for me was some phrases and verbiages were reminding me of similar phrases and verbiages in other areas of Scripture. So that's really what we're going to be talking about. Not really digging into Hebrew meanings of words today or anything like that. And just some commentary on things that, sorry, there's an ant on my face. We have an ant problem. And just some things that struck me as interesting or things that I particularly liked. And the first one is this concept of the Levites as an elevation offering. And so in chapter 8, Yahweh is telling Moshe essentially how to set aside or set apart the Levites to cleanse them and make expiation for them so that they now can serve in the temple. And they would be serving under Aaron and his sons. And what's very interesting is the verbiage that's used here is that, I'm actually just going to read it here. We're in chapter 8, verse 13. It says, "You shall place the Levites in attendance upon Aaron and his sons, and designate them as an elevation offering to Yahweh. Thus you shall set the Levites apart from the Israelites, and the Levites shall be mine." So it's like a double layer of being set apart. The Israelites are already set apart. And then the Levites are even further. And that's just because they're the ones who are dealing with the work of the sanctuary and the tabernacle. After that point, they are then qualified for service in the tent of meeting. It says in verse 15, "Therefore the Levites shall be qualified for the service of the tent of meeting once you have cleansed them and designated them as an elevation offering. For they are formally assigned to me from among the Israelites." And what's really interesting about this is they are actually in place of the firstborn of the Israelites. So if you remember in Egypt, the plague of the firstborn, it was then that Yahweh claims the firstborn for himself. And there was this idea of redemption. You redeem the firstborn. And we've talked about that before in Leviticus. But here I just want to read it so everybody remembers. This is chapter 8, verse 16. "They are formally assigned to me from among the Israelites," speaking of the Levites. "I have taken them for myself in place of all the first issue of the womb, of all the firstborn of the Israelites. For every firstborn among the Israelites, man as well as beast, is mine. I consecrated them to myself at the time that I smote every firstborn in the land of Egypt." So we're just going back to that concept that was originally introduced in Egypt, and really seeing the special level that the Levites are on for dealing with the sanctuary. And they're kind of as an extra layer of protection. In fact, in verse 19, it says they're formally assigned to do this, to make expiation for the Israelites, so no plague afflicts them for coming too near the sanctuary. So it's very interesting, just the rituals that have to be undergone by the Levites, and the fact that they are called set apart and belonging to Yahweh, and that they're in place of the firstborn of the rest of the Israelites. Now in chapter 10, we hear about the trumpets, and usually we think of shofars, which isn't necessarily bad, but here they are actually silver trumpets. So Yahweh tells Moshe to have 2 silver trumpets made. There's 2 of them. This makes me think of the 2 witnesses. And the different blasts mean different things. And so when both sound with long blasts, the chieftains need to assemble. If they're short blasts, that's for setting the camp in motion. Long blasts convoke the congregation. Now, I'm not quite sure what the difference is between these long blasts that are convoking the conversation versus the ones that are calling the chieftains to assemble. When it says the chieftains are assembling, it does say that both are blown, so maybe it's that 2 are blowing at the same time versus 1. But what's very interesting is that these sounds are a reminder of us before Yahweh. So when he hears them, he remembers the children of Israel. And so just think about that next time you're blowing your shofar. And this also makes me think about Revelation. There are trumpets that are sounded, and they mean different things. And if you understand what the different blasts mean, then you can have a bit more context and understand Revelation a bit more. Short blast, setting the camp in motion. Well, where are they going? they're going to the promised land. They're going to the place that Yahweh has prepared for them. And so we can start to connect that with different areas of scripture where we read the trumpets. We also read about the trumpet blasts when they're marching around the city of Jericho, which fell, all sorts of things. But in general, it seems to have to deal with gathering the troops or setting the troops or the masses of people out into motion. Now, there's this interesting thing that happens when the people start complaining for meat. They're really tired of the manna. They really want their garlic and onions and other food that they had in Egypt for free, they said, which is really funny that they say that because they were slaves. So I wouldn't say that didn't come at a price. Maybe they didn't have to pay money for it, but they were paying with their lives, essentially. And Moshe is complaining to Yahweh, and the verbiage he's using is carrying the burdens of the people. And he says it's too much for him. He can't bear it all. And that's when Yahweh tells him to gather some of the elders that can help shoulder the burden. This just makes me think of Yeshua, who carries our burdens. And in return, we're asked to carry his yoke, which is light and easy. So just another example of something in the Torah that makes me think of similar verbiage and parallelisms with our Messiah. Now, Numbers 11:23, I'm just going to read this. I'll start in verse 22. Moshe, what's happening here is Yahweh says, I'm going to bring the people meat to eat. And they're going to eat it for an entire month until it comes out of their nostrils. And in 22, Moshe's questioning Yahweh. He says, could enough flocks and herds be slaughtered to suffice them? Or could all the fish of the sea be gathered for them to suffice them? And in verse 23, and Yahweh answered Moshe, is there a limit to Yahweh's power? You shall soon see whether what I have said happens to you or not. And as soon as I read this reminded me of the exact same verbiage that Yahweh said to Moshe back in Egypt still. I'm going to read it to you. This is chapter 6 of Exodus, verse 1. And actually, we'll start in chapter 5, because it's the similar pattern. Moshe is questioning Yahweh after Yahweh tells him what he's going to do. And in this case, he's questioning, why did you send me? Ever since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has dealt worse with this people, and still you have not delivered them. And Yahweh says, you shall soon see what I will do to Pharaoh. So in this case, you shall soon see what I shall do to Pharaoh. But in today's Torah portion, you shall soon see whether what I have said happens to you or not. And it's like, Moshe, didn't you learn already? You're kind of being just like the rest of the Israelites. But I think that's a good lesson for us. We're all human. Moshe was special because he had the spirit of Yahweh. And in fact, what's really interesting about when these 70 elders are chosen to help him shoulder the burden, it says that Yahweh, the Father, is drawing on the spirit that was on Moshe and putting it also on the 70 elders. And I find that really interesting. But it just shows us that we are still human, physical vessels for the spirit of Yahweh. And sometimes our human side takes over, and Yahweh has to remind us, nope, and just watch and wait and see, and I will show you. So that's all I had for this week's Torah portion. A little bit shorter, but I just really liked, the more that I'm reading and studying, the more I read these phrases that I've read elsewhere in Scripture. And it's just more confirmation that His Word is true, and it's the same. It's unchanging throughout the years and throughout the eons. And we can trust in that and have faith in that, because if our God changed, how could we trust Him? So I hope you've been encouraged by the Torah portion this week. And if you have any comments, questions, personal revelations to share, please, as always, feel free to do so. Shabbat Shalom.